softly, with gravitas. Ladies and gentlemen, most people spend their entire lives, running away from a ghost that lives inside their own skin. We present ourselves as polished, kind, and composed, while suppressing the parts of us that feel, unacceptable. But what if the very things you are hiding are actually the keys to your true potential? I want to show you why your internal exile is sabotaging your life, and exactly how to reclaim the power you've buried. Think about the last time you felt a sudden surge of irritation, a spike of jealousy, or a dark impulse you immediately labeled as wrong. Most of us react by slamming the door on that feeling, don't we? We bury it, we justify it away, or we project it onto the people around us. We are terrified that if the world, or even if we ourselves, saw what was truly hiding in the basement of our psyche, the carefully constructed image of who we are would shatter. But here is the psychological reality that few care to admit. That ghost you are running from is not a monster. It is a vital part of your own humanity that you have somehow abandoned. When we talk about the shadow, you see, we are talking about the reservoir of traits, desires, and experiences that we have deemed incompatible with the person we want to be. Consider the child who was told that anger is unladylike, or that ambition is selfish. Over time, that child learns to hide those traits so well that they forget they ever possessed them. But energy does not simply vanish. It moves underground. It becomes a shadow that follows you into every boardroom, every romantic partnership, and every quiet moment of reflection. When you deny these parts of yourself, you aren't just pushing away the bad. You are inadvertently suppressing your capacity for passion, your ability to set firm boundaries, and the raw creative energy that makes a life authentic. You are living as a hollowed-out version of yourself, constantly exhausted. I mean, truly exhausted from the effort of keeping the door to your subconscious bolted shut. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to ask ourselves, what is the cost of this internal exile? When you hate a part of yourself, you lose the ability to understand it. And when you cannot understand it, you cannot control it. It begins to leak out, in the form of self-sabotage, projection, and that nagging feeling that you are playing a role rather than living your life. The goal of our exploration today is not to become these shadow elements, but to integrate them. It is about moving from a state of internal war to a state of wholeness. By acknowledging the ghost in the machine, you strip it of its power to haunt you, and instead, you reclaim the energy that was once trapped in the effort of running away. You are more than the polite mask you show the world, and until you are brave enough to invite your shadows to the table, you will never truly know the depth of the person you are capable of becoming. Gentle, measured. Ladies and gentlemen, we often carry the weight of a performance that, it never really ends. You wake up, you put on the mask of the composed professional, the patient partner, or the selfless friend, and you begin the daily ritual of editing your own humanity. But have you ever stopped to consider what that editorial process actually costs? When you force your anger, your ego, or your darker, more chaotic impulses into the basement of your psyche, you aren't destroying them. You are merely changing their address. Firmly, repression is not an act of elimination. It is an act of storage. Softly, and like any container under constant internal pressure, the human psyche eventually begins to leak. Think about the sheer amount of mental bandwidth required to keep your acceptable self on display.
while simultaneously suppressing the parts of you that don't fit the narrative of being good. Directly, it is an exhausting, full-time job. Insightful? This right here is the origin point of the modern epidemic of burnout. Gently, it isn't just that you are tired from your career or your chores. You see, you are tired of the internal civil war. You are spending your life force holding the door shut on parts of yourself that actually contain the fuel you need to thrive. Whispering, this suppression, it creates a strange, hollow sensation. Reflective. You might have noticed it during those quiet moments at the end of the day. A feeling that you were watching your own life from behind a sheet of frosted glass. Slowly, you are good, you are polite, and you are kind, but you feel strangely powerless. Curious. Why? Measured. Because you see, power is derived from authenticity. When you cut off the parts of yourself that are capable of assertiveness, healthy aggression, or self-interest, you are essentially neutering your own character. Warningly, you become a version of yourself that is safe for others, but dangerous to your own psychological health. Slowly, when we fear our shadow, we develop an allergy to our own emotions. Matter of fact, if you cannot accept your capacity for anger, you become a person who cannot set boundaries. Measured. If you cannot acknowledge your own ego, you become a person who is easily manipulated by others. Softly, by trying to be perfectly good, you are accidentally becoming perfectly powerless. Warmly, philosophically, you see, the shadow is not just the home of your worst impulses. It is also the reservoir of your vitality. Pondering, but that leaves us with a difficult question. Deeply, if we spend years building a wall between who we are and who we show the world, what happens when that wall finally starts to crack? Curious. And is it possible that the very things we are most terrified to acknowledge are actually the keys to unlocking your true potential? Measured, mysterious. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where the story takes a much darker and perhaps more necessary turn. Ladies and gentlemen, you see, we often treat our psychological shadows like a cluttered basement, a place to hide the parts of ourselves we deem unacceptable. We tell ourselves that if we just keep the door locked tight enough, if we present a polished, moral, and perfectly curated image to the world, we are finally good. But this is the great deception of the modern ego. By attempting to kill off our darker impulses, we aren't creating goodness. We are simply creating a vacuum where our personal power should be. Consider the person who pridefully claims they could never be cruel, never be aggressive, or never be selfish. Often, that individual is also incapable of setting a firm boundary, incapable of standing their ground when it matters, and strangely devoid of genuine creative spark. Why? Because the energy required to be dangerous, to say no, to challenge the status quo, to advocate for oneself, is the exact same energy they have spent a lifetime repressing. You see, the shadow is not a collection of flaws meant to be surgically removed. It is a reservoir of raw, unintegrated potential. When you bury your capacity for anger, well, you bury your capacity for passion. When you hide your ego, you hide your confidence. You cannot truly be a person of substance until you have acknowledged your own capacity to be dangerous. True sovereignty does not come from being harmless. It comes from knowing exactly how much damage you are capable of and choosing, through conscious discipline, to act with integrity instead. This is the paradox of wholeness, isn't it? We want to be saints, but we refuse to admit we are human. We think that by ignoring our darker impulses, we transcend them. In reality, we are just becoming unconscious. An unexamined life isn't just a missed opportunity. It's a ticking time bomb of projection. When you refuse to own your shadow, you will inevitably see it in everyone else. You will be haunted by the cruelty of your friends, the selfishness of your partner, or the greed of society, never realizing that the very traits you are attacking in them are the parts of your own soul you were too afraid to integrate. But there is a catch. Once you begin to pull back the curtain and invite those exiled parts of yourself back into the light, well, the view isn't always pretty. It is messy. It is uncomfortable. And for many, it is terrifying because it forces you to drop the mask you've worn for years. It requires you to stop being the nice person and start being a real person. And that brings us to an even more unsettling realization. If your shadow is actually the source of your vitality, then what happens when you finally stop fighting it? Whispering. What happens when you realize that the monster under your bed has been the one guarding your greatest gifts all along? That is a question that requires us to look even deeper into the architecture of your subconscious. And I'm afraid what we find there might change the way you see your own reflection forever. Slowly, with gravity. Ladies and gentlemen, you see, integration is not about destruction. It is about alchemy. To stop the shadow from burning down your house, and it will, you must, quite simply, invite it to tea. This is the process of bringing the unconscious into the light, transforming those volatile impulses into your greatest sources of wisdom. The first step, right, is what I call the mirror audit. We all have those moments where a stranger's behavior, or even a friend's comment, sends us into an irrational, white-hot rage. We usually assume the problem is them. But the mirror audit requires a radical shift in perspective. When you feel that visceral trigger, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what part of me am I seeing in them? Are you angry at their arrogance because you are actually suppressing your own need for confidence? By identifying the trigger, you are essentially locating the shadow's anchor in your life.
Once you have identified that trigger, you move to the second step, radical naming. We give our shadows power when we allow them to remain as vague, haunting feelings of shame or anxiety. To strip them of that control, you must name them precisely. Don't just say you feel bad or off. Call it what it is. Is it envy? Is it a fear of abandonment? Or is it a suppressed hunger for control? By giving the emotion a name, you move it from the primitive, reactive center of your brain to the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and analysis. You are taking the ghost out of the closet and sitting it down at the table. Finally, we must find a constructive outlet for that dormant energy. Your shadow contains raw, unrefined drive, contemplative. If you suppress it, it becomes self-destructive. If you express it blindly, it becomes chaotic. But if you channel it, well, then it becomes fuel. If your shadow is aggressive, can you channel that energy into a high-stakes professional negotiation? Or perhaps a grueling physical discipline? If your shadow is sensitive and insecure, can you channel that into art, empathy, or deep philosophical inquiry? You are teaching your shadow that it no longer needs to act out in the darkness to be heard. You are offering it a seat at the table of your personality. But even as we begin to master this internal dialogue, there is a lingering danger that most people fail to see until it is far, far too late. What happens if you become so comfortable with your shadow that you start to enjoy the darkness more than the light? That is a question we are only just beginning to uncover. And the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is
far more complex than any of us would like to admit. This brings us, to what I call the sovereignty loop. When you stop fearing the parts of yourself that society told you to hide, well, you stop leaking your internal energy. Think about how much of your daily mental capacity is spent simply holding back, covering up a moment of jealousy, hiding your ambition, or apologizing for your intensity. That suppression, you see, creates a massive energetic deficit. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It requires constant, exhausting effort, and the second your grip slips, the truth shoots to the surface with chaotic, uncontrolled force. But when you integrate these traits, the energy you were once using for containment is suddenly released and reclaimed. You become sovereign over your entire psyche. You are no longer fragmented. You are a whole, unified entity. You don't react to your environment. You respond from a place of complete internal clarity. This is what it feels like to live authentically. The shame dissolves because there is no longer a hidden basement in your mind to protect from the light when faced with the light. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to sit with that for a moment. To reach this level of integration, we have to move past the intellectual understanding and step into the honesty of the experience. So I must ask you, what is the one trait you have been most terrified to admit you possess? Is it a capacity for cold calculation? A hidden hunger for recognition? Perhaps a streak of selfishness, right? That you've been taught is a moral failing.
Whatever that trait is, I invite you to stop running from it. Own it. Acknowledge it as a part of your human machinery that, when understood, can be harnessed for your own growth rather than used against you. You see, we are not meant to be one-dimensional beings. We are vast, complex, and capable of holding the entire spectrum of human experience within us. If this exploration of your own mind resonated with you, well, I invite you to join our community here at Mindscapes Explored. Please subscribe to stay part of these deep talk conversations as we continue to navigate the landscape of the human condition together. Thank you for walking through this darkness with me, and I look forward to seeing you in our next deep dive.